Hello, Brilund.
Hello, Warren.
How's it going, man?
Good. Can't complain.
Good.
How you doing this evening?
I'm good, man. I just finished work. Kind of late, but it's worth it. I'm getting ready for a little vacation, so excited about that.
Nice.
Oscar buzz is done. I'm binging a show I'm about to finish. So, all in all, I feel pretty good. Pretty good about my life. How about you?
Not too bad. I had a day off today, so I spent the day just doing my usual routine, getting up, working out for 30 minutes. Made this cool Tunisian dish for breakfast called shakshuka.
I saw that. Looks delicious.
It is awesome. It's like tomato stew with eggs that are poached inside the tomato stew. So it is amazing. And then I went out, ran some errands, saw a cool movie, Fighting with My Family, which I would love to talk about.
Yeah.
Because it's about wrestling, and it's wrestling season right now. So that was awesome. And other than that, I listened to Joe Rogan interview Alex Jones for 5 hours straight, which
there we go.
Mind-blowing. Like, if you ever wanted to just hardline every alien conspiracy or government conspiracy talk at one time, definitely listen to this podcast episode because, it goes into some crazy-ass places.
Nice.
But it's hilarious to listen to this, and you don't, I mean, would I say Alex Jones actually wholly believes in everything he talks about? It's a fine line, man. It's tough to know. He definitely is, he's definitely not batting 1,000. Let's just say that.
That's fair. I think hopefully I know our listeners can kind of gather what you're putting down there. So, all right.
Yeah, and but it was still, I found it to be entertaining and also just really interesting, just listening to, hearing what he quote unquote believes in, just because of his reputation and everything.
Nice.
But other than that, I also finished True Detective Season 3 today.
Nice.
Watched the final episode a few hours ago, and
fresh in your mind.
Yeah, it's fresh in my mind. I like what they did with this season a lot.
Well, before we get into that, we are the Down in Front podcast. Last call. What's going on, Brilund? I know. We hang out. We try to make this a little bit different. Just have more conversational pieces, and always try to have more just conversations about movies and TVs and things that we're doing. It's a little bit different than our main sort of Down in Front podcast, where we talk about what else we've been watching and drinking. We kind of cut all that filler out. We've cut all that fluff out, and we're only going to be talking about one thing today. True Detective, Season 3. Super pumped. Brilund's here. Warren's here. Yep. I'm sipping on some sweet tea and vodka. What you sipping on?
I'm sipping on water right now.
There you go.
Because I drank about 3 coffees today, and I was debating whether or not to get another coffee, but I was like, nah.
4 coffees is a lot of coffee.
It is. Yeah, I usually drink 1 coffee a day. So
oh, damn.
I don't know. I was just craving coffee today for some reason.
There you go. Well, I mean, I'm pumped to get your thoughts on this because I know I think we had a chance to talk a little bit about Season 2 of True Detective, and that was pretty much of a disappointing all around. I enjoyed it for what it was as a whole when it was there, but just because it was kind of coming off of Season 1 that was pretty groundbreaking, pretty great. I think almost everybody really enjoyed Season 1. Season 2 was just a bit of a letdown and disappointment. So going into Season 3, starring Mahershala Ali and Stephen Dorff.
Yeah, if I could go back to that, because I do want to talk about the first season, couple seasons.
Sure.
for a little bit. Yeah, like season 1, it was phenomenal, like season of storytelling of a hard-boiled film noir detective story that's embedded into the Southern mysticism and Southern lore and things like that. Mm-hmm. And also was incredibly acted by Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson. Like, when you got two actors like that, I mean, you really don't expect, like, second fiddle type of acting. It was definitely incredible what they did with that first season. It was definitely fitting with, like, a lot of modern Southern Gothic tales as well, which I really appreciate because that's probably my favorite genre of work that's out there when it comes to novels and reading. And then season two I find interesting because I actually do appreciate what they did with it. I do feel like it is a little bit more derivative of the type of detective story they're trying to tell. I mean, it's more the West Coast noir story, which is very tough to actually capture, I think, because if you look at, like, the two best representations of, like, West Coast detective stories, Chinatown and LA Confidential, they are always about, like, these real estate development properties that have gone awry and all the underlying hands that are involved in it. And they do get super complex and weird, but also at the same time balancing that they are set in beautiful sunny California at the same time. So how do you bring out that rough underbelly of quote unquote one of the prettiest places on the planet? So I always found that to be an interesting struggle, and I think that they kind of leaned a little heavily on saying, like, hey, let's just do it the way Chinatown did it and tell that story again, just with different characters. And I found that, yeah, even though it wasn't as spellbinding as the first season, I still enjoyed it for what it was.
Fair.
And then this third season, when it's placed in Arkansas, and I thought they were going to kind of tread familiar territory from season 1. You do start to get those feelings at the first couple episodes, but then I mean, overall, I love where this story ends. Mm-hmm. I love that this is even though it's called True Detective, this story is not necessarily about the case that's happening. Even though they do some very cool things, I think, with the case at the end, I find that it's about learning about a lot of different ideas, whether it's going through hardships in many stages of life, mm-hmm. Not being the greatest at your job, which I really appreciate because we see super cops in the first season, so it's good, like, kind of lead the audience astray to, like, find out, hey, they're detectives. They're more just average detectives, which mm-hmm. I thought was really cool. And then also they cover so many really cool ideas and themes I think are really important to think about, like growing old and facing mortality, or elder care, or even though you mess up, hoping for the best out of the outcomes. And I kind of like that this story ends on more of a happier note than the others too.
Yeah, I mean, and so at the top, the one thing I did want to mention to everybody is we're going to be ruining and spoiling every season of True Detective. So if you haven't seen this, it's probably not the best episode to be tuning in on. But yeah, I mean, I definitely do agree with you for what you're saying there, Brilund. And I like the fact that each and every one of these seasons were different. Mm-hmm. I think what really failed, though, about season 2 was that the scope and the characters it just felt like it was too many, and the storylines felt a bit messy and a bit muddled. I wasn't sure if I should be rooting for or focus on Colin Farrell's character, or Vince Vaughn's character, mm-hmm. or I always forget this guy.
Rachel McAdams.
No, I know McAdams, but the other guy. who was a detective, but like not, or did a police officer. I always forget
Taylor
his name.
Kitsch.
Thank you. Yeah. So you basically had those 4 characters, and you're like, I guess I'm like kind of bought in because I assume Rachel McAdams is good, but then maybe Colin Farrell's, and so I felt like already with season 2. The first episode was really tough because you're like, what's happening here? This is a new environment, a new land, right? You're titling this True Detective, and I think they already did themselves a little bit of disservice starting season 1 off such as a high southern. Just the shit. You had like religious beliefs and a lot of stuff that's being kind of ingrained into there that people can kind of sort of understand. To then completely switch it up and do an entirely different location was kind of a bummer. So I really like that they brought it back to a more smaller scale. They only had 2 detectives, right? In this one, and we focus on Mahershala Ali's character. Who he plays by Purple Hayes or Wayne Hayes. And so I think the first thing that I really enjoyed about this season was they introduced that he has some sort of condition. They didn't really necessarily kind of talk about it, but I think one of the first lines was, you have issues with the brain. Don't whine about it. Suck it up. He listens to the tape every day and kind of goes about his day. So I thought that was actually kind of pretty cool. And just the ways that they're telling the story, the devices that they're using now to tell the story in this particular season, especially because we're going into 3 different time periods, 1980s, 1990s, and then 2015. And so because we're jumping through these 3 times and we have our main character who at times may not be a reliable narrator, he's having difficulties and issues with his memory, which we're going back and through times. I felt like that was a really good complement of some really pretty awesome storytelling to be an exceptional. I thought he was an exceptional. I thought he was the exceptional True Detective. We got Matthew McConaughey's character Russ, right? I think it's Russ.
Yeah.
In season 1, and then Woody Harrelson's good, but really, we're there for Russ. Yeah. Season 2, I'm not sure who was the exceptional one. I don't know if there was, but I think it's exactly how you said, right? They kind of like disbanded that idea. This season here, because Hayes was a LARP, they called long range reconnaissance. I think he kind of truly kind of dialed in. Right. But it was also kind of focused on, I think you had talked about that, a little bit of the society and the police force around him, in the either the fact that he was black or the fact that there were so many things that were preventing him from doing his job. The societal racism, the things that just kind of implemented and institutional racism. There we go. It just, he could never do what he really wanted to do and what he kind of fought in the war for. So I liked them opening up this particular kind of season 3. I like how they showed a bit more human elements and human emotions. In season 1, it felt like they were a bit superhuman. Season 2, we're not entirely sure what they were. Season 3, it brings it back. It brings it back home, right? But not just in the southern. Like I have never been to Arkansas, right? I have no idea what that life is like. So they give you a bit of a slice of life of what it looks like, what it feels like being a black detective back in 1980, to go through with that and having a partner who's a white detective, and what that looks like for their particular sort of relationships through everything else. So already,
I was fishing in those woods last year. So
nice, there you go. But already, like, the premise of the show, I think, was already better than season 2. At least because you have a bit more buy-in, right? You have some smaller characters. You start figuring out what's trying to happening, and as I usually do, I'm trying to like solve the piece and like come up with my theories more and more. But sometimes the show's not about that. Sometimes it is. As we went along, I was definitely thinking, oh, did this happen? Did he kill him? What happened there? And in the end, I think it ended up being all an accident. With it, I'm still curious to talk about that, because I still have a couple of things I do want to talk about.
You have some conspiracy theories about this?
Of course, come on, man. But I do have some theories. But in the end, the whole story and the big thing was, it was just an accident, and they tried to cover it up, and they tried to make it so that she was okay, and they were just such beautiful, such sad moments that they had the ability to put into this actual TV show that I was just so glad they did that. So that's our small review overview of the season season 3 as a whole. But I really enjoyed it. But man, I gotta start the show off here and says MVP. I know it's easy to say Mahershala Ali is the MVP of this, but
what they're both doing here is phenomenal. But Steven Dorff, you don't expect it from him.
Not at all.
Yeah, I mean, like, when I saw Steven Dorff's name on the credits, I was just like, okay.
Yeah.
I know what Mahershala is capable of. I know Steven Dorff's capable of being a cheesy vampire.
Yeah. It's such a bummer because it was like, he's really good, and then you feel a bit saddened of like, where has this dude been? I really hope this kind of resurrects his career, because I really like this character, which is completely different. He ended up being, arguably, he was one of the good people, one of the protagonists, and at times Wayne Hayes, or Purple Hayes, ended up being the antagonist a lot in the story, a lot in the scenarios of what happens and how each and every one of the police cases has to be closed down, ultimately because something that he may have done or achieved and kind of drastically kind of changed the case. So I like the fact that Dorff's character, his name's Lieutenant West.
Roland West.
Roland West. So I really enjoy his character a lot. I think he gets my MVP award at the top of the show.
Yeah, I mean, the character Detective Roland West, I love him. He reminds me of some people I used to work with that were former police officers. And, I mean, he's a neat character because he does have that detective edge to him where it's like, you know what, I won't have a normal life. I'm not going to have family and kids because of this life I live and this job I have. But also at the same time, he does everything he can to be a good friend to Wayne. I think it's really cool because, I mean, a lot of things about institutionalized racism, especially on police force, we've seen this be in cinema and TV shows and be addressed a lot of times, especially with like Black Klansman that just came out recently, which takes a very hard-nosed stance that it's real, exists. It probably will always be there just because of racial differences, and that how do we overcome it is like something they don't ever address. And I love that through the conversations that Hayes and West have, like driving down in cop cars and everything, Hayes brings it up and everything. And it's like, I mean, I'm not the right pigmentation, he says, when it comes to like Roland getting a promotion and being head of the state task force in the 90s versus what they did in the 80s. But it's also the way Roland West approaches those conversations, I think, is very authentic and actually true to what a lot of people kind of feel is that, I mean, all right, you're griping at me about this huge thing, but I'm just one person. Mm-hmm. And if you're telling me what the problem is, like, hey, I know what the problem is, but we're two people. We got to do something bigger than that to actually make it happen. And necessarily right here and now, when we actually have to actually be detectives and investigate a case, are we going to solve this bigger picture issue? The truth is no. And I love that they actually address that when they go to that community that they find the one-eyed black man and they start asking him questions, and all of a sudden it's everybody's on edge all of a sudden because there's two cops rolling up in this black community. And I mean, the one-eyed black guy, he starts, yelling at his neighbors, hey, come look at these cops. They're harassing me and everything. Really well done scene. But also at the same time, Detective West I love his just frank honesty about everything is like, I know we're not going to solve all the ills of our race relations here on your front lawn, but I'm wondering if you could help us out a little bit. Yeah. And I'm just those moments where Detective West is just like frank and honest about the obvious and the state of things makes him such a compelling character that he is showing that like, hey, I'm supporting you, I'm here to help you, Purple, but this institutionalized racism, probably a bigger fish than we can fry right now. We need to focus on our case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you did mention a bunch of things there, and the want to talk about the one-eyed black guy was not the main one, and I think one of the lines, and this is I think first or second episode now, but one of the lines that really caught me was he goes and they're like interrogating him. He says, we're looking to see if you saw some kids. He's like, well, some white kids, because they were in the paper. That's the only reason why you're going to be here. That's the only reason why you're asking me. And they're like trying to kind of hassle him. They try to kind of shake him down. And I always think it's curious because now that I go back and kind of think about the entire season, I'm like, they were some bruisers. West and Hayes beat the shit out of a lot of people. Yeah. And it definitely, you can see it now, as obviously you can kind of go through. Even before they even got on this case, they were just drinking. And Wes is just kind of shooting his gun.
Shooting random things.
Yep. So there are definitely some bruises. I thought that was actually kind of funny because if you then fast forward it all the way to the last episode when they go and approach the correct one-eyed guy, Mr. June, that was also hilarious to see two older guys kind of walking up with guns. I'm
limping.
I was like, no way they're going to beat this dude up, are they?
I'd love to see a whole season of geriatric True Detective.
That's the next season. That'd be great. Yeah. I'm all over that. I do like that because we are kind of introduced to some of these weird or interesting character quirks, but we also are provided more of an understanding of these characters, of kind of what they went through, and with a series of flashbacks in the passages through time of going back from the 80s, 90s, and in the 2000s, we are now seeing, how these people were kind of meant to be. But during that time, we still aren't sure how Hayes and West became to be, right? When we are first introduced to them, they already are a unit, and we see them go through a lot of shit that they've never been through before. And then what happens in the end, and how they ended up becoming friends in the end, which is great. But I do like that we've gotten a couple of breadcrumbs that was kind of sprinkled through some of these early episodes as they're trying to figure it out. And I also like the fact that as they're trying to figure out a story in the 80s, Hayes in the 2015s being interviewed by a woman who's saying that does this seem like a cover-up? And he was like, I just can't remember. And so you can see that there's some things that's kind of obvious, but you're not entirely sure. Was there foul play? We don't necessarily know. Did Hayes and the West do something? So I just like how they ended up kind of constructing a lot of this storytelling. They were giving us bits and pieces while still giving us mounds of information, exposition. We just didn't know it yet, right? It took us a whole episode or another episode down the line to be like, oh man, I got to go back and rewatch that first or second episode to see what I may have missed. So I really liked how they were constructing us learning about these characters.
Yeah, and they do a really cool thing with the story here. Sorry, I choked on something. But I like that they kind of started similar to season 1 of True Detective, where you're out in the forest and you see these two cops and they open their trunk and there's a guy tied up in their trunk and stuff, and you're wondering what the hell's going on. Oh my God.
Sip that water, my friend. Sip that water.
But over the episodes, they start to, actually focus more on Hayes, and this is actually Hayes' story. Mm-hmm. That it's not about necessarily solving this case. It's more about him trying to remember or at least complete something in his life, for whether it's for what he feels are the last wishes of his dead wife, or if it's something that he just feels like he needs to do for himself to feel like he's a complete whole person. Because this is like an unsolved case that's lived with him his entire life. His wife wrote a book about it, so it's actually in the cultural zeitgeist. It's huge. It's popular. I mean, there's a TV show being created for it, and it's really cool to see this journey that he takes. And I find it really neat that we always refer to his time in recon in Vietnam and everything, and this actual series ends with him walking into the jungle in Vietnam, which I think is a really neat way of ending the story, is where it kind of begins. That he basically has gone through his whole life through all this murkiness and not in like a jungle, just dense and not sure where to go next and everything. But once he actually completes this case and understands what happens, he kind of is okay to let it go. And like says, okay, I have a little bit of clarity for my life. Now it's okay for me to get lost. And I think that's a very poetic way of like ending the series.
So I'm curious about that last moment, because I had, not so much of a theory, but I was curious to see, during the show, we only got like kind of bits and pieces of what he was doing in the war and when he did. Even one of the episodes we saw that it seems as though Hayes, in the 2015 year, was seeing images and seeing people, and not just seeing Amelia, what was his past, or his deceased wife at the time, but he was seeing these figures, and almost as if he was seeing these ghosts. That was when he was looking out the actual window. And so I was curious about, we didn't see him ever, in the jungle. He talked a bit about it. He talked about some of his friends that are dying, so it seems that he has like some...
you see, like, Ghost of Viet Cong haunt him at one time.
Exactly. So it seems like he has, like, some stuff that he has to kind of get, basically, I guess, off of his chest, and he has to kind of come to terms with. But I interpreted that last moment as being a little different, that he was just kind of going on his next journey. He kind of went through, and he made at peace with something that he never had peace with for years, almost 30 years, right? Maybe longer than 30 years. And now that he's there, he just wants to kind of keep going on. He now, although he has to live with this condition that he has, which I don't know if it was like dementia or Alzheimer's, but he has to now live with that. The fact that one of the last moments is he's going into the actual woods again, I thought was very interesting. It seems like he's now at a path that he can start anew. He can basically start anew. So I was like, that's actually pretty interesting. I didn't even really think about that too much. What do you think about that last moment? How does that interpret to you?
Yeah, it's very interesting to me, because we see him happy on the porch. We see Roland come up, greet him, and meet his son's wife, and meets his daughter. They hand him sweet tea, which I really love. They're all in rocking chairs on the porch. I mean, I was getting homesick watching that. And they're like having a happy family moment and just staring out in the woods and stuff while drinking sweet tea. But then you also see this look of fear on Hayes' face. And then it zooms in on his eye, and you go into the jungle. And for me, I'd like to think that look of fear is not about him afraid of he missed something in the case again, but it's more of that fear of just mortality. That it is that, your mind's going, you're going to lose things. It's a scary moment, but this is life, and this is something that I feel like he kind of has accepted at the end, that he doesn't really need to put in the effort to solve this case, that he does have some peace, but it's not going to be a total peace. It's something where, his mortality is creeping up on him, and that's the only thing to be scared of now. that everything else is secondary to that.
Yeah, I actually didn't think about it that way. I guess that's a good point. I also think, again, spoiler. I also think, the scene that we got right before was when he met up and actually found Julie Purcell. And she had changed her name, and then we actually learned the fact that she has a bit of a dissociative disorder. So she actually doesn't even know who she is because of the medicines that that Isabella was feeding her.
Yeah.
And so I was also curious to see, and I loved that moment to see. It felt like they put that in for the audience to react to see, is he going to recognize her? He spent all this time, years to find her. He actually incidentally sort of found her through reading Amelia's book, and not only reading Amelia's book, but he also found her through Amelia talking to him, as a ghost or something in his past. And so I was like, really sitting there, like on the edge of my seat, like, is he gonna recognize her? Is he gonna say something? And he just didn't. And they instilled and they put in a small little I can't remember what the actual literary term is, but they put something in that they already had mentioned earlier into the actual season. I guess they were foreshadowing earlier of when Hayes was talking to his son in the police department. He says, "What happens if you get lost?" He says, "I just take out my phone, I just hit this button, and I just call you, and I'll let you know where I am." And we don't see that at all for any of the actual episodes until the final episode. He goes and finds her, and he can't remember how he got there. He can't even remember what he's doing there. Picks up his phone, calls, and that was a really, really great moment too. And we actually see his daughter. So I think that was also like very, very fulfilling to the fact that it definitely kind of meant to me is that although sometimes in your past you try to find peace with a lot of things, sometimes you also have to just try to live in the moment and just kind of appreciate what you do have. In the entire series and the entire season, we didn't really see his daughter. I was convinced his daughter was dead. At the same time, I also had a crazy theory that he was actually Purcell and his daughter was the one who ran off. I was going crazy.
Yeah, it could have gone all over the place. I was waiting for either him or Roland to turn up and have like a pink room somewhere.
Yeah, right.
Which would have been nuts.
I thought for the longest time, because he was having some issues with his memory, I thought that he was the culprit for some of this stuff. And then I was like, oh damn! Especially when the new reporter was talking about how it seems like there's so many dead bodies. Everybody's kind of basically turning up dead. And nobody seems to have any answers of why they ended up turning up dead. And so I thought that was cool. I was like, man, what the hell did he do? He doesn't even remember what he did either. So I think that was actually kind of a pretty cool moment. But definitely kind of appreciation what you have. I really enjoyed that sequence, although it was heartbreaking as the audience, because you wanted his character to fulfill his mission, his goal, his objective. He still got a chance to do that. And that was with him just going through kind of having his family back, although he still can live with his condition, having Roland West back into his life, and he even talked about how they're going to move in and have the dogs together. So I thought that was actually kind of really, really cool, especially because their falling out really ended up being because of they killed somebody. So I was like, I guess it's a fair way to fall out. I mean, if I lose a friend, I guess we're not the only ones going down, I guess.
Tough thing to live with, yeah. I'm curious, I forget, did they mention, what happened to his daughter? Wasn't she mentioning about going somewhere to California or something like that?
Yeah, so it was interesting. You're right.
Okay.
It was a little weird. Sure. It was a little bit of weird, and it was a bit of a parallels that I was drawing between that. Because it seems as though his daughter was kind of following in his footsteps of the footsteps of what Amelia was doing, being in California, being a bit of a rebel, going to school there. And when we hear, you know, Amelia's a little bit of her backstory, and I think the first time you get mention of his daughter, Hayes' daughter, is when they're sitting at the dinner table, and Hayes has a bit of an episode that he kind of forgets, and he asks his son about, oh, I can't remember her name, but I just can't wait to see Harry. He gets upset and kind of storms out the actual room as if he doesn't remember. So we actually, it was tough to see. I'm like, is she alive? And then, you know, in one of these episodes, I think it may be 6 or 7, we see that he's in another episode, a bit of a memory of when he's dropping her off and when she's going to college, so she's a little bit older. And so you can see that, okay, so it seems as though she's alive, seems that she's kind of gotten out of the picture, she's gotten out of that realm a little bit, so she's gotten out where everybody else seems to be still in that area. But how does that affect her, right? And why did she leave in the first place? That's just, you know, a couple of the questions that I really never got answered. It's kind of a bummer, but I don't think you can get everything answered, you know?
Yeah, and just to explain to our audience a little bit of why this would be seen as a rebellious move, you would think like someone who wants to be a writer or more creative would go out to like the West Coast or the East Coast. But when it comes to writing, some of the top writing universities in the nation are University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, which is like a 20-minute drive where they are at, or Oxford, Mississippi, or UNC. So the South has a very strong creative writing presence when it comes to higher education. So that's why we get this argument. And I like that they actually kept it grounded to that culture in that area, which is really cool. Mm-hmm. But I did want to backtrack a little bit and talk about like a bit of the beginning, especially like one character that I really appreciate because I like this actor's work, and that's Scoot McNairy as Tom Purcell, the dad of the missing kids. Scoot McNairy always pops up and plays these very tortured roles. And he does a great job with it. I guess it's like he has that look, or he has that ability to capture just grieving really well. Mm-hmm. And he does a fantastic job in this series. I think his character is very tragic. We see him struggle with drinking, being a kind of a neglectful parent, along with his wife, who's even more neglectful and has her own drug problems as well. But I did like this kind of like friendship, like since Hayes took himself out of the picture, we learned to know that Roland actually started doing these things for Tom to help him get cleaned up, help him actually lead a better life, because he had just had both his kids taken away from him, and his wife is a complete mess. His whole life has been pulled out from underneath him. And so it was cool to see that side of Detective West, even though he's very edgy and hard-boiled, that he is a person of empathy that can see someone that needs help and is willing to help them out. And he even, like, we see that friendship grow in, like, very little moments, but it's cool to see that he's still, after 10 years, checking in on them and seeing how are the meetings going, what's the Bible class like, and things like that. And it's really cool to see, you think Tom's life has gotten to a place where he's come to acceptance. And then this video comes out of a strange woman in a gas station. Mm-hmm. And we get this phone calls like, that guy that was on the TV, that's not my real dad. Tell him to leave me alone, type of thing. And it just destroys any good build up that Tom had done for himself as a character, and it takes him over the edge where he starts confronting people and getting violent and everything. And then suddenly, we have this character. Oh, what is his name?
Who are you talking about?
I'm talking about, is it Mills? The detective that went around cleaning up everything for the Hoyts.
Oh, the police officer for the
that works at the.
He got hired for Hoyt, right? I think it may be Mills. I'll look up his name though. But go ahead.
Yeah. But this character ends up saying, like, okay, this guy can derail everything, and fakes Tom's suicide, essentially. And that's the reason why. Hayes and Roland grab that officer is because they know something's fishy with the suicide note and with the suicide of Tom Purcell. But overall, I did love what Scoot McNairy brought to that role. I thought he was fantastic in it.
So the actor you're talking about was Harris James.
Harris James. I knew it was like two first names.
Yeah. I also I have to agree with you. I really, really enjoyed him in this role. And then a super side note. I just remembered why Hayes' son looks familiar. And I was like, he looks familiar, but he looks normal. There was something that I recognized him
He didn't
from.
Have all the metal on.
Yeah, I was like, oh, he's Cyborg. Got it. Okay. But I did really, really enjoy Purcell. I felt like he was a bit of a beacon in this actual show. I know that we talked about our protagonist, we talked about the antagonist, we talked about all these other things, but it really felt like Scoot McNairy, he really drove the show with his kind of involvement and engagement, especially when he first lost his children. He's kind of all over the place and kind of freaking out, and a lot of actions kind of going through him. Then they had to close the case, and then he changes his ways and has a best friend with West, Lieutenant West. And after that, and the phone call comes out, or before the phone call comes out, they get the fingerprints. Then he gets almost back into this oh man, there's a chance. I lost hope, but now you're saying that there could be some hope here for me. That also leads him to a bit of a dark path, which is unfortunate. And he meets up with Mr. James again. So I really like that he definitely felt like he was a driving force in the show. I liked his character a lot. I wish, and it was kind of a bit of a bummer, that I wish that we got a bit more from the mother, especially because I didn't realize she was the daughter of... Help me out. You know this. Super famous. The most famous person.
In the world.
One of the most famous people in the world.
Who was it that you were... The daughter?
No,
the mother of the daughter?
Yeah, her name is Mamie Gummer, but she's the daughter of... She looks exactly like her. Meryl Streep. There we go.
Oh, Meryl Streep. Yeah, I was like, that name sounds familiar. I was like, yeah. Gummer. Okay.
So I kind of wanted a bit more of her, especially when we find out that in the end she was the one who sold off her children. That sucks. And the fact that you have these detectives who's trying to solve a case that continually keeps getting derailed by all these other things in the story that somebody's trying to leave, when she's just sitting on the answers the entire time. I'm curious to go rewatch it and see her expressions, but even her random deaths, right, from an overdose, was the drug overdose. That also kind of leads them down even more of a bit of a rabbit hole. But I definitely wanted a bit more from her character, because it definitely felt like she kind of played one note the entire series, and that was kind of sad. At least Scoot McNair's character, Tom Purcell, he was kind of up and down. He had a lot of rage. He had a bit of an arc. Whereas for... Her name's not Julie Purcell. Her name's Lucy. Yeah. Whereas Lucy, it felt like they talked more about her from all these other characters. I guess because she'd already had passed, right? Amelia was going around asking about the bar, asking her friends, asking for pictures, and it felt like we learned more about her when she was not even on screen. That's kind of a bummer. I felt like we could have learned a bit more about her while she was still alive. Granted, she was only alive during the 80s. It looked like she died before the case got reopened in the 90s and after. So I kind of get why we didn't learn as much, and that we did a lot more with Tom. But I felt Tom was, again, that beacon that we learned so much from in the 80s and then so much from in the 90s, and then we see how he actually died, quote-unquote, self-inflicted gunshot wound, but not quite. And so I think that they could have balanced that out just a little bit more for me to kind of want to buy in and kind of add her into the actual mix a little bit, so that she's kind of in on the mystery. I thought that would have been pretty cool.
Yeah. And you mentioned Amelia, and Amelia is played by Carmen Ejogo, and she does a fantastic job with her character as well. I love, you have this teacher that sparks interest in this case with kids because she was a teacher to one of the kids and is concerned about their welfare and everything. But also she has this dream of becoming a writer. Mm-hmm. And that when her relationship with Hayes starts to grow during the case and they become an item, they eventually get married, they have kids, they have a falling out, and I guess they have a divorce at one time. But there's also, looks like at a moment that when they're older, they do reconcile a bit too. And I found her journey to be really neat and everything. I thought it was really cool to see that even though she wrote this book, it puts Wayne in a very rough spot when it comes to his job, because she wrote this tell-all about this case that went unsolved, and the entire all the information about it leads to kidnapping and a murder that happened. And this book, it kind of, they say, stops because we assume that this character that was a Native American living there that was collecting garbage. Oh, what was his name?
Oh man, that was a bummer. His character name was Woodard.
Woodard. That they ultimately decide to blame the kidnapping or the missing daughter and the death of the son on him, because they find their backpack and her shirt at his household when they had this big gunfight and everything. But it's interesting to see, like, when she gives her first book reading in a bookstore and everything, we see the one-eyed man come in and everything and, like, criticizes her book and is like, do you know what you actually wrote here and everything? We find that Hayes has to choose between his career or denouncing what her book's about. And when you look back at it, the right thing to do would be to denounce her book and sign that paper discrediting it, because that book, even though it kind of leads to where Lucy's at, it also kind of poisons their case as well, especially in the 90s when they tried to open it back up and see, can they figure this out finally. And it's really cool to see that you do get this, you do get the good and the bad of, like, when a case like this goes into public perception versus keeping it within the police environment. It could do good because you have more awareness of what's going on, but also it could cause a lot of bad because you can also bring a lot of false information into the woodwork as well. And if people start accepting it as the truth, then it's never going to lead to what the truth is. And we find that the truth is still very heartbreaking. It's very bittersweet, but it's not necessarily a criminal case that we find. Then one thing I do wish they did, though, with Amelia is I wanted to see how she died. They put this, like, brief moment where we see Hayes as a chief of security at the college that she's teaching at, and they're both old. They both got gray in their hair. So we even have this, like, unique extra jumping point that's even, like, 10 years after the 90s, where she's teaching at a college. He's the chief of security there, and he's just standing at her doorway and smiling at her, reading to her students, and she smiles back, and I'm like, oh, okay, so they had this rough patch, but it looks like they reconciled and they're still a loving, happy family. But we know when we see her at that moment, she's about to die very soon, or a few years after when we see her. And I thought it'd be interesting to see, like, what did that moment look like? What did it mean to Hayes before he starts getting in this time frame where he has this memory loss issues and everything? How did that impact his life? when she dies.
Yeah, and that's a good point because majority of the time and all throughout, this is only 8 episodes, right? So out of the 8 episodes, we have only been in these 3, like they set the parameters, right? You're telling me and we're going to set the timelines. The only stories that we're going to tell is the time from the 80s, the time from the 90s, and the time from 2015. And we can also tell by the hairstyles that Mahershala Ali has, which is great. Which other super weird side story. In 2015, Mahershala Ali was reminding me so much of my father and how he was dressing.
Oh, wow.
I almost couldn't watch it. I was like, this is too weird. I gotta stop. I don't like it at all. Anyways, and so it's once you deviate from that path, there's a reason. And in my mind, I always think of, this has to be something bigger, right? Like, if you're going to tell me a time that's outside of those 3, like outside of this realm, why are you going to do this? Are you going to be leaving it up to something else or not? Is this as weird flashbacks? One of the things I was thinking of is, I guess this is just more the inner workings, the inner machinations of Hayes' mind and how really has the ability to kind of process. He's just living through everything as if it's every day, and these memories is hitting them in waves. But again, we had mentioned that moment, right? Like, that was one huge moment that they deviated from the timeline. That's not 2015. That's definitely not 1990. That's something in between. Why are you showing us this? It's important to us to know, but we didn't quite get why you're showing, and we also didn't quite get why and how Amelia died, unless I missed it. We actually don't know that information, and she was a pretty vital character throughout this entire series, and so that kind of dies off screen. Is kind of weird. And that also leads me to what we were talking about earlier, right? We are started with 1980s. We have no idea what happened previously before the 1980s.
Yeah.
They end the show all the way, right, when Hayes was going back, when he was in the war. And that's another thing in which, wait, hold up, like, you already told me these 3 timelines. Now in the last 2 episodes, you give me these 2 other times that
extra timelines.
We're not entirely sure. Yeah, so that's also kind of led me to believe that what's really going on here. I need to learn a bit more about what's going on. I want to learn about this actual time. There's a reason you're showing me this, but I'd love to know some more information. I get why, if the series is going to end, why you can't show us that. Okay, fine, you can end up as a bit of a cliffhanger, I understand. But then, in between, I'd really like to know why you're showing me this information, or why you're showing me when Hayes goes and visits Amelia. Kind of seemingly not for the first time, right? He's done that a lot. But I'd like to know that. I'd like to know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it starts to get a little hazy about what is a moment where it's Hayes' mind playing tricks on him, and what is a moment that he's actually remembering everything. Like, I think one of the best scenes, or one of the best moments in the show, is when Hayes and Amelia go on a double date with Roland and this girl he meets at the Catholic Church, and Roland is fantastic there, where he's like just walking around the church, is just like, wow, there's a lot of pretty ladies here. And so he just like finds the prettiest one, starts talking to her, and so you eventually see like this double date happening, and then you actually jump to 2015, where Hayes and Roland are meeting essentially for the first time after 25 years, and Hayes, like, he meets them, and he's like, where's so-and-so? I think her name was like Jessica or Jennifer, and he's like, what are you talking about? It's like, that didn't become a thing. That was just me flirting with a girl one time, and I'm like, oh, he actually thinks that Roland had a life and relationship and stuff, and like, and was hoping for the best for him.
Yeah, he's asking you about married. He asked him if he had kids, and he's like, no, what? No, I didn't do any of that.
Yeah, and it's very sad to see, like, his mind is betraying him like that. And even to the point where, like, we see when Hayes decides not to sign that paper to discredit Amelia's book. When he packs up all his stuff and everything, he tells Roland. Roland's like, at the end, like, is talking about procedure and professionalism, but the last thing he asks about is, what about us? And Hayes says, yeah, we'll get beers, we'll go to games, it's okay. And then 25 years pass, nothing happens. Mm-hmm. And that's like one of the most, it's a amazing scene, but it's also very heartbreaking because you see Roland just standing there with his head down. He knows, like, nothing good's going to come from this. And you see this slow buildup of Hayes being transitioned into this information processing basement, basically, which is just like the sounds of the typewriters are just starting to annoy him as soon as he walks into the room. And it's very sad to see, like, he makes this one choice and it kind of just breaks up this really cool partnership, but also starts to lead him kind of astray.
Yeah, and I think, you even hit it on the head earlier when you're talking about how good of a character Lieutenant West is, or, I keep calling him Lieutenant West, but how good of a character Roland West is. And Roland is, during the 1990s when they were seemingly kind of hit a couple of dead ends, they're not entirely sure. It was like right after the case kind of, well, they were about to, actually this was right after the case closed, so they were kind of arguing. He was like, he had said something along the lines of, I asked for you to bring you back. I know you're good. I wanted you to be on this. I could have asked anybody else, but I asked for you specifically because I know that you're good for this. I know it can bring you back. I know that's something that you want to do. You don't want to be stuck on the actual desk. Which I didn't realize. I thought he was bringing them back because of, something else. But like, even for unfinished business, but it was like, no, I wanted this to restart your career. I wanted to get you back on the actual path so that we can sort of move forward and build towards what we were trying to do back in the 80s. That it just didn't happen. And he had, and again, it was another kind of ultimate sacrifice to the point where a lot of times, a lot of instances in which I felt like Hayes had to make a difficult choices more and more. One of the first ones we see is that when he had to kill Brett Woodard, which is, that was a heartbreaking moment, and that was a really, really sad scene, especially because he was innocent entirely. Woodard was innocent. We see some blowback later on from his family coming back, and that was in the 80s, and basically that's how that case had to close. And then in the 90s, the case had to close because he had to choose between Amelia or his career. Amelia's book or his career. So that's another reason why that case had to close too. So it's just like, shit, man, that's actually kind of tough to be living with some of these choices of, it could have went a different way, but either was it pride, he didn't really have a choice, it was life or death. Obviously, killing Brett Woodard was a bit of a life or death, but I felt like there could have been things that they could have avoided that shootout, because I did not realize that shootout was going to happen, by the way. I was like, oh shit, this is crazy.
When Woodard pulled out that bag, did you think it was a body at first?
Pulled out the bag?
Like the wrapped bag that has all the guns.
Oh, no.
Because they pull that out in one episode, and then the episode ends, and then we see what happens in the next episode.
I thought that was guns.
You thought that were guns?
Yeah, I assumed that was kind of guns. Especially when they were walking through his house, and the thing they were talking about that he actually served. I think early on there was an alignment between Hayes and Woodard's character that they both are sort of damaged and has gone through some stuff that's not quite has the ability to kind of heal and hasn't quite kind of opened up and kind of talked about it. And so we see how it's affecting people differently. We see how Hayes is dealing with it and kind of going through life with it, right? He finds love in the most unfortunate scenarios, right? If it wasn't for this missing child's case, he never would have found his wife, Amelia. And so we see that one path of what Hayes is doing, and then we see Brett Woodard's path. He's by himself, completely innocent, going around.
He had a family and kids at one time.
Apparently, right? And they were like, "No, you didn't. Shut up." And he did. He actually did. But he's going around. He basically is a trash man. He's going dumpster diving, kind of collecting a bunch of different people's trash as collecting, and that's something that he wants to do. But they both served, and so I think that's also something that I'd be curious to go back and like rewatch to see what sort of messages that you're sending for there, because we spend a lot of time in that veterans only bar.
The VA Lodge.
VA Lodge, yeah. That Hayes felt the most comfortable with. And, fast forward to one of the last episodes, we see that Amelia goes and meets him there and basically says, no, I'm not going to have anybody like talk to me like that, and basically goes back and tries to get their marriage in another go. This is back in the 90s, and seemingly that's kind of the last fight that they have before Hayes just quits. He leaves the police force entirely, and they just go and enjoy their life.
Yeah, and let me look up some text messages I sent you earlier, because I remember their fights are some of my favorite moments just because the dialogue is so good. Mm-hmm. And let me see if I could... Oh, yeah, here it is. So, before I get into, like, the brotherhood of, like, military fraternalism and stuff like that, I did want to mention whenever Amelia and Hayes fight, it's amazing just because of how cold Hayes is, because he's not yelling at her, he's not getting aggressive, but he has some of the best clapbacks I've ever heard in this show. Like, one time when she's arguing with him, when they're like, we feel like they're kind of on the outs and the kids are like in the living room watching TV and everything. He walks into her room or she walks into his office and everything. They start arguing about something. It's because she actually said she was his ex-wife to a detective that asked about the case and everything. And when they start arguing, he just cuts the argument down cold by saying, I'm not here to trade cusses. I've said my piece. And I'm like, damn, that was harsh. And then the first time she walks into the VA Lodge, like the bartender's like, oh, you didn't serve any time. We can't serve you here. And Hayes kind of vouches for her. Mm-hmm. But then when we see them near the end where it feels like, okay, it looks like they're leading to a divorce or something, that he's like, I'm sorry, did you serve time in a foreign area? Should you be in here? And that's all he says to her. And I'm like, damn, this is so good, because we're not getting this like in your face yelling and screaming or violence or anything. We're getting this like cold shoulder, like edge and chip that speaks more volumes, I think, because it's a lot more subtle, but it's also very smart. It shows how smart these characters are as well.
I really like one of the best clapbacks, that's what we're talking about, is when they're arguing. They argue a lot, apparently, but they're arguing, and she goes, he's like, don't talk to me like that. Why are you talking to me like that? Don't talk to me like that. She's like, why? What are you going to do? He's like, well, if you keep talking like that, I'm going to cry. And I was like, oh, man, that's a great line. I did not see that coming at all. And even her, Amelia, was like, oh, that's a first. I didn't see that at all. And so I was like, yeah, bro. Like, I like this little difference of a character. Like, he's a hard-ass character, but at the same time, he has feelings. And I like the fact that he was pretty honest. He was still, stunted. There was still ways in which he could have shared a little bit better, right? He's hurting. But I felt as though that he was pretty open. He at least kind of pretty honest, especially with one of their dates. And I think they were talking about the case, fairly open in public when there's a waitress walk up. It's like, oh shit. And so, I do like the fact that, again, I think when you had mentioned earlier, right? One of the things that it was really difficult for me to buy in for season 2 is because I just couldn't really relate to any of these characters. I've never been to California, right? I've never been a police officer. There's a lot of other things I've just never been. Yeah. But I've seen enough shows. I've seen enough movies to be like, oh, cool. I get it. Right? And so I've never been to Arkansas. I don't even know what a LARP was. I've never been to Vietnam, but at least I can relate to these characters a bit more. I can care less if he was black or white. I still related really, really well with Roland West, especially when everything falls out and he finds his little dog and he just starts taking care of this dog. Yeah. And then, it's kind of a flash forward or flashback.
That bar fight's amazing.
Yeah, that was. I mean, it's just like it's things like that you kind of injecting. They kind of putting this in. They just shows the realness of people, right? They shows that people are hurting, and then they shows the fact that you don't necessarily have to turn to a bottle or drugs to kind of go out and kind of let out some of this actual anger that you do have. Now, don't necessarily keep it pent up, right? Because people are going to think that you're paranoid, right? And that's, I for sure thought for the longest time, I'm like, that dude's paranoid. There's nobody sitting outside his house. Yeah, there is, actually. There's somebody who's been sitting out there almost every day. And so I just like the fact that they've shown a sense of vulnerability with a lot of these characters that allows me to kind of feel with them, and it allows me to get a bit more buy-in. It has nothing to do with the mystery or anything. It's just how these characters are constructed in this day and age, especially if we're going from time to time to time, to the point where even when he's older, he's in 2015. He still got it. He's still he's still smart. It just his mind isn't as healthy as it used to be, right? So he then sways back and forth in another time, and so he may not necessarily be there, which is kind of unfortunate.
Yeah, and like one thing I really liked about the show was this whole idea of the military fraternalism or. Like serving service and recognizing that we see it a lot in a lot of character moments. Like we're introduced to Hayes and Roland as like he talks about his partner Purple Haze, that he's a tracker. He'll find anybody, and we see that talent, that skill, and how amazing it is. With the finding of Julie's brother dead in the cave. But also, like, the idea of him being recon versus Roland, who was just quartermaster and supply. I mean, there's definitely two different avenues and lives, even in a war, in a theater of war, what you're doing. Like, recon, they're more than likely not expected to come back if the shit hits the fan, because you're asking just like a small group of people to like scout ahead, see, are there booby traps? Are these tunnels safe to go into? Are we able to ambush this enemy patrol line if we mark up here, if we go 1,000 clicks into the jungle? And, if your recon patrol does not come back, it's dangerous because they're dead. Or if they do come back, hopefully they got a lot of good intel for you. So there's only two ways the recon, life of a recon can go. So it's very, very lucky that he actually got out of Vietnam alive. Whereas Roland, as quartermaster, he was probably at a base constantly, just making sure supplies got to where they need to go. Kind of a cushy job unless his base got attacked. And then we also meet, who was Woodford? Is it Woodford? Woodard. Yeah, we meet Woodard. He was infantry. So, yeah, he's the grunt with the gun and shooting at the bad guy, being told to shoot at the bad guy. Which, we can see that, he is a damaged person from whether it's that experience, but also we see as soon as they share their military history, Woodard has the utmost respect for Hayes and Roland as police officers because of that shared experience that they have from Vietnam. And then we later on meet Michael Rooker comes out of nowhere.
I love that cameo. First of all, love me some Michael Rooker.
Yeah, Michael Rooker's great. Yes. And we get him for this brief moment as Hoyt, who is this big chicken farmer. I guess it's an allusion to Tyson Foods because they're based in Northwest Arkansas. And we see him, he's in a limo, he's going into the forest, and he's always drinking a bottle of whiskey and looks disheveled and haggard, but he even shares his war stories that he served in Korea and that he was like one of the few people to live out of his unit in minus 30-degree weather, that they were sent to be slaughtered, and they were there so the Marines could actually escape, and so they put their lives up for the Marines to get out of a sticky situation, which seems like he was damaged by too. But like we learned that he also has a whole lot of family issues that are happening down the road. And even though we don't get to learn more about Hoyt, and he's kind of set up like to make us feel like, oh, is he the big bad guy of this? Because we get the illusion of it's one of my favorite things that they do with this show, and they do it so well because they don't hit you over the head with it, but it's nice that they acknowledge the other seasons. We get this. The reason why they reopen the case is because they talk about, these two police officers in Louisiana stopped this serial murderer and rapist that was possibly kidnapping on behalf of a slavery ring to export people for sexual slavery and things like that. That could have been, there could be connections here, and they kind of allude to maybe Hoyt is the big name behind this more darker edge that's happening in the Ozarks here. But, I mean, that completely becomes totally not the case. That's not why he's a weird, hard-drinking dude. So this whole, human trafficking scenario that they brought up to kind of connect it to season 1, I like that they did that. But it's neat that they also kind of leave it to be that it's it's not a false pigeon, but it's a red herring. I just make up shit.
Yeah, I was like, what?
Pigeon.
I was sitting here on the term red herring. I'm like, I know he's going to say it. I'm sure he's going to say it at some point. Nope, he didn't say it. I mean, they do that a lot. I love the fact that there were so many misdirections. There's so many red herrings that they were using. I was very curious about that one because I was all about it, and then it was like, nah, not really. But I was like, but wait a second though. There is still some foul play here that I think that wasn't really addressed. What happened to Dan Bryant? we know who killed. Yeah,
no, but I think I guess Hayes and Roland are the only ones that put it together that Tom does not commit suicide, or they get a feeling that he doesn't commit suicide, and everybody else, it's an open and shut thing.
Yeah.
So there's no mystery behind that.
But we don't know because when we do meet the Hoyt, it definitely seems like he's kind of sort of innocent, but you're not entirely sure because he's clearly looking like a bad dude.
I mean, it's Mike Walker, so
yeah, exactly right. So. I was curious when that was mentioned because they found that information about the dolls and that sort of stuff. They found that out in 2015, right? They didn't put anything two and two together in the actual time frame, probably because they couldn't. But those dolls were also being created by a random church lady too. That was part of the church.
They were sold at the Catholic Church functions and stuff.
Yeah, but that lady that we met, she made them.
Yeah, she made the dolls.
Yeah, and so I guess for me, this is a bit of my weird kind of sort of. I got to put my tinfoil hat on what Dr. Bob talks about. I was like, wait, so I don't think it's coincidence that is the same type of doll that was used in season 1. I think there is some connection. Yeah, I think there was some connection there that at that time and during this story, that was just one of the things. For me, it felt like there is a connection, but there's so much other shit around that they can never get to that connection. They can never actually fully kind of open it up and kind of solve the case as much as they wanted to, because there was so much other shit that just kept getting piled on them. But I was kind of bummed, but I was also excited. First of all, I was kind of bummed. And I was like, wait, hold up. If I get these 4 dudes in one room, I'm going to lose my shit. That'll be great. But I knew that it's not going to happen. But I was curious to just kind of see, that was a crazy thread that they were kind of pulling from this. Are we going to get a weird crossover? That would be great. But I feel like that could come back. If this comes back for season 4, I'll be curious to see if that comes back, because now we're provided with a story that's pretty large, right? We have a story that's in Louisiana, we have a story that's in California that I think is going to be kind of thrown away, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So I think
it'd be hard to connect that.
Yeah. But we have a story that's in Louisiana. We have a story that's in Arkansas, right? And so we have a bunch of different timelines, and now we know that these timelines has interjected or intersected at some point. And so because that not just a coincidence, right? There's still something happening. Was it coincidence that Harrison James flew when Lucy had overdosed? Is it coincidence that Dan O'Brien body turned up dead randomly, which is also kind of weird. Also to the fact that everything in that Hoyt was basically the Hoyt's manor, or that company was kind of behind everything up until 2015. It seems like it was kind of abandoned, I guess, repossessed and owned by the government or by the state or whatever. And so there was a lot of other sort of unasked, unsolved questions that I'm like, yeah, there's still a case here, but I guess we're not gonna. I guess we can't kind of unpack that because there's just so many other things they have to unpack.
Yeah, and even though we see Harrison James's demise, and we see the role he essentially played was, for some reason, many years ago, he was the officer that kind of was the first on site to the wreck of Hoyt's wife's. Hoyt's daughter's husband and grandchild, that their deaths in a car and everything, and he wanted to help clean this up for some reason. We don't know the motivations behind that, whether or not he just wanted an end to a rich family or that there were other motivations.
He covered it up. I think that's when they found him, because he found out he has the power to cover it up. They didn't want it to be such a huge scandal what actually had happened. And so that's when he came into their service. Harris James started working for them way back when. And then that also then puts a domino effect of him planning the evidence and everything else is happening.
Yeah, I mean, he becomes essentially like Hoyt's fixer for when bad things happen, but also I think it's interesting because, like, yeah, someone that's like super rich, especially in an area like that, even though it doesn't seem like Hoyt personally ever did anything directly like criminal, like he didn't really murder anybody or anything. It's just like he had a lot of tragedies and things where he didn't want people asking questions about, that he took the easy way out and used Harris James for that. But also it is like a mystery. Is Harris James somebody that this was something he's always done, or is this something that one day is like, you know what, my life could be a bit better if I do some work for this guy, because he can definitely pay more than what the police force can. So he becomes a bit of a interesting character because we don't get to know much more about him. He's just kind of there and then he goes, and it's unfortunate that we don't get more understanding of who Harris James is.
Yeah, I agree. There's a few things that I was kind of bummed about. I was like, man, I kind of want to learn more about this. And I think it was just like, hey, we want to tell you this story that we have. Like, there's not going to be any story that's 100% satisfactory, right? So we have to tell you from what we constructed a fitting into these characters. And it's not always going to end in a gunfight. It's not all going to end in some weird kind of crazy murder. I enjoyed the fact that this was a bit more subtle. This actually was an accident, and so many other weird kind of cover-ups that just kind of boiled up to be something problematic. And so I thought that was I really like that. I really enjoyed the season a lot. I mean, I'm probably going to kind of rewatch it sometime soon. Maybe. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff out there, but I do want to rewatch this again to get a deeper understanding. I think season 1 I watched at least 5 or 6 times. So I'll definitely want to do that. Season 2, barely watched it one time. I did enjoy it for the time being, but I think, again, we talked about it, right? After watching something else, clearly it seems like these showrunners were like, oops, our bads, let's not do that again. And so now I'm like, oh, maybe it wasn't as good as I thought, right? Looking at hindsight, so we'll see.
Yeah, I did really love this season. I think it's a really cool. I like that they kind of took the time to kind of put you back into this Southern Gothic film noirish tale, and then pull the rug out from under your feet, and we get a really well told story of a man facing his mortality, and we get to see Mahershala Ali act the shit out of essentially what I would say are three different characters, because that's the cool thing about this is, like, as we get old, like, we're not the same person we were 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 30 years ago. And Mahershala does an amazing job of just making that work with every single time frame and everything, that you could even put him up for 3 different awards for pretty much the same role, just because that's how good it is. And I mean, the guy just won an Oscar for his role in Green Book, and he even won an Oscar for his role in Moonlight. So the man is really talented, and yeah, he should be nominated for all the awards, including him with Stephen Dorff. And also, I mean, I would even put Scoot McNairy in there, even though he's not there through all the episodes. I think Scoot McNairy just does this type of character fantastic.
I thought you were going to say something about Alita Battle Angel.
I mean, Mahershala wears shades really well, too.
So true.
But what I would ask you is, if there's a True Detective season 4, where would you like to be it set, or what would you like it to be about?
Yeah, that's a good point, because I feel like they need to go back to season 1 and 3. Not so much season 2, but something that has a good amount of believability or buy-in from people. And I'd love to see something that an area that we haven't quite seen before, either overseas, right? Something maybe international, maybe Alaska, something a bit more remote, like these places here. Or I think if they were to kind of flip it on its head and say, you know what, let's do a True Detective like New York City or something like that. Or probably not Chicago, but like New York City, or something that's, maybe Chicago, whatever. But something that's a bit more kind of citied, because there's a bunch of other shit that is kind of going on there. And I think that'll be a couple of cool areas for it. I think my first gut will tell me, like, I think it'll be nice to check something out that is international, something outside of the U.S., just to see, get a little bit of subtitles, kind of get a kind of understanding, just because there's a lot of deeper, I feel, right, there's a lot of deeper rooted either religious beliefs or other just beliefs that people necessarily have that tends to be a lot more things that are covered up. So I think that'd be actually kind of pretty cool. But, I definitely don't mind it being in Tennessee or Georgia, because there's some shit that's happening down there. So
Orlando.
OBT, bro. There's some shit happening in OBT.
That monorail.
I used to live in OBT. I'm telling you, man, shit was crazy. So, yeah, I mean, like, I think that's going to be probably some of the locations that I dig a lot. I'm trying to think of even places that have like some funny accents that will also be pretty cool. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, it seems from these 3 seasons that Nick Pozzolato's comfort zone is in the South. I mean, he's from New Orleans, so he definitely knows that material much better than other places. I think, 2 words I got for him are Texas Rangers. Texas Rangers, they are a very unique law enforcement unit. You could go either way with it, showing like modern Texas Rangers, or go to the past, because they were they're kind of given like carte blanche to do whatever the hell they want to actually bring in the people that they were tasked to do. And they were basically government issued bounty hunters, which is what Texas Rangers are. And if you put it into like the Panhandle of Texas, or even Dallas Fort Worth, you could go all over the state of Texas, just because it's a huge place and there's actually a lot of diversity to Texas as a state. Like the Panhandle is like kind of a no man's land. West Texas is like full of these oil fields and cattle ranches. that could be explored. And then you also have some of the biggest cities in the nation with Dallas, Fort Worth, and Houston, which could be some amazing, like, just sprawling urban environments to explore as well.
That'd be cool. I don't know if we have to wait another 4 years, because it seems as though they're doing it every 4 years, so that'd be kind of a bummer. It seems though they're not. But the first season was in 2014, second season 2015, third season 2019. So I'd love to have like another series sometime soon, maybe within the next year or so. I think that'd be pretty cool. Hopefully they are working on it. It's obviously it is clear to me that the location is probably really key. After that, the casting is also very key. Because I thought Vince Vaughn, Colin Farrell, Rachel McAdams, and name I can never remember, Taylor Kitschens, I know. I thought that was it sounds like a pretty good cast on paper, but those characters were just poorly constructed when you compare them to the other characters, the Russ and the Lieutenant West, Roland West in the Purple Haze, and it's just like, damn, that's kind of a bummer, but I think that'd be cool.
And Vince Vaughn reminded me how good of an actor he is by going to see Fighting with My Family, so.
Oh, nice.
I mean, the dude could have done more with, like, that role that he was given.
It was just kind of tough. It felt like he was supposed to be like a Kingpin-esque character.
Trying to go straight.
Yeah, but it just didn't work for, I guess for the show. It could have worked from a different show, a different perspective.
Yeah. Who would be your dream casting for another season?
Oh, man. I feel like we have to switch it up because we got a lot of dudes here. And so I feel like we have to have... I'm trying to think of some of my favorite women that's out here right now. I do really enjoy Tessa Thompson, but she also looks very similar to Carmen Diego, so I don't know if that works out, but whatever. I think Tessa Thompson would be kind of pretty cool. She's a really, really great actress. I'm trying to think of some other really good female characters or just women actresses. I don't know. I got to think about this. I'd like to see Tom Hanks in something a little more darker.
That'd be.
I know,
like him as like the head of the detective bureau or something like that.
Exactly.
That'd be cool.
I think. Let's see. We have like some rising stars coming up.
Yeah. I mean, really... I like Emily Blunt. I mean, she does good stuff.
Yeah, but at the same time, I'd be very, very nervous that her role will be too close to Sicario.
True.
So it's
Claire
possible.
Foy.
Oh man. Yes, make it happen, Brilund. Make this happen. That's my dream cast. That is my dream cast. Claire Foy and Tessa Thompson. With Tom Hanks as their, like, supervisor or whatever. Like, those three, I guarantee you, if they're like, you know what, this is the new cast, everybody's going to flock to it. It's like, yeah, of course, we're going to watch that, duh. Yeah, that'd be dope. I'll be down for that.
Yeah. I don't know why, but, like, since he's been doing a lot of suspense thrillers and actually been getting a lot of good praise for his suspense thrillers, I kind of want to see John Cho.
Interesting.
I think he'd be pretty cool as a detective.
He had a pretty good movie, Searching, I think it was called.
Searching, yeah.
Yeah.
He had another one that came out last year that was along the similar lines of a suspense thriller, and he got rave reviews for as well. But like I think because he's been doing like these really cool, like hard-boiled like mystery thrillers recently, that he might be a good fit for like a hard-boiled detective show.
Hard-boiled's your word, bro. Oh,
hard-boiled.
Man. I would love to have a True Detective that's a guest director of Jordan Peele. That would be dope. Like have him be on there. Yeah, I think that'd actually be pretty cool.
Or have Keegan-Michael Key play one of the
No. I know exactly where you're going with that. No, we're not doing that.
Keegan-Michael Key and Thomas Jane.
No, I know where you're going with that. We're not going to bring up that movie. Let's not do that. That was a shitty movie. We're good. We're past that. Lasting thoughts, Brilund. What you got for True Detective Season 3?
True Detective Season 3, I felt it was a fantastic season. 9 out of 10 would watch again. I love just all the red herrings that they put in to kind of make you feel like it's going to be another dose of Season 1, but it becomes something totally different. Mahershala Ali and Stephen Dorff and Scoot McNairy are definitely standouts with the acting. Oh man, I closed IMDb. Amelia's actress is fantastic as well. I feel like near the end, because they just have 8 episodes, maybe some things were just wrapped up a little too neat, and maybe they needed another episode or so to kind of explore other things like Harris James, or maybe not have the big exposition dump from the what was the gentleman's name at the end that just tells them like
Mr. Junius.
Mr. June.
Yeah.
Mr. June. Like having a little bit more build up to that story, or earning that story a little bit more instead of just sitting at a table and hearing it from them. Even though I think the end of that story is fantastic, how he wants them to kill him, and he wants them to either take him to jail or kill him because he's old. He's confessed his sins, even though he is not really a criminal in any way. So I love how Hayes just says, we don't have the authority to do that. And they both pick up their guns at the same time. And they pause for a second, then they just walk out the door. And for some reason, he feels like he needs to be punished.
Well, he was obstructing justice. He definitely is at fault. And he's not to blame for the death.
He could have come out and explained, like, hey, this is what happened long time ago. It's interesting to say, like, if you keep those secrets just out of loyalty to a man that showed you kindness and that you helped throughout this life with raising his daughter and everything, is it a criminal act? And I like that gray area of it. It's you can go either way with it, and I think that's a fantastic end to that story, but I wish there was more time taken to build up to that moment with Mr. June.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think the strongest things and the strongest moments of this actual season was just the amount of setup and detail that they have with their characters and all their journeys. It should have definitely gotten 2 more episodes. I think a nice 10 episode season probably could have breathed a bit more explanations that we needed. Carmen Ejogo that you were talking about. Her character kind of disappeared. There were just a lot of stuff that I'd like to see exactly what happened with it. You know, we talked about that moment of, Hayes going up and looking at Amelia when she was teaching. I'd like to kind of expand on that a little bit more. Why did his daughter leave in the first place? Why did his son choose to be a police officer? And we understand he's having an affair, which is, I guess, cool. They just didn't even address it anymore, which I think that was okay. I don't really have too many concerns.
Was he sleeping with the documentarian?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I got a feeling it was like they were or they weren't, and I guess Hayes called him on his bullshit.
Yeah.
type of thing.
So there's a lot of unanswered questions that I assume that you're going to get from a crime sort of series, but I feel like there was enough that's I feel like you could have navigated just a little bit easier to give us a bit more detail. Amelia's character was so important that just literally died off screen. That was a bummer, and we just got her in shades as if she's kind of a ghost. And it seems as though they were trying to introduce a supernatural element to this that I'm not sure if that was kind of intentional or not. So I think with those 2 other episodes, they could have probably kind of cleaned up a few different things. But at the same time, it's a, pro and con this. I definitely don't want them to stretch out the series just for the sake of explaining a couple of the side characters. So I'm torn, right? I'd rather you not maybe do 2 more episodes, but give me maybe 15, 30 minutes more on the last few episodes so that it could explain this a little bit better. I think that would have been super helpful.
Yeah. If Game of Thrones can get 90-minute episodes, why can't True Detective?
90-minute? Why stop there? 120. Holla, boy. Come on now.
8-hour episodes.
No, now you're crazy. Okay. you lost me at 8 hours. And with that, we are the Down in Front Podcast. Thanks everybody for tuning in to our last call segment. I don't remember if we ever talk about what we've been watching and what we're going to be reviewing next. But check out more of our work at downinfrontpodcast.com. Brilund, where can people find more of your work?
You can find me on Twitter at Brilund, Brilund. Just being on Twitter.
That's Twitter?
Nothing fancy.
Nothing crazy.
Maybe some Stone Cold clapbacks. Who knows?
There we go. We got a lot of content out, so I'm excited for that. So we have a good amount of episodes coming out. We have, by the time you hear this, you're going to have some stuff that's already circulating. And so definitely get prepared, get ready. We're going to be doing probably the largest review we're going to have is the Captain Marvel. So that's probably going to be the biggest
7 hours
release. 8 hours. 7 hours. Come on, man. I don't have a life. I need to do 8 hours. So I'm pumped about that. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks for joining, and we will see you later.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.